All right, Happy New Year. I'm sure everybody heard what happened this past weekend. The U.S. brought in 2026 with a bang, literally bombing Venezuela, going in to kidnap Nicolas Maduro. Air defense system stood down. That's a huge red flag. We don't know what happened here. We're still in the fog of war stage. It's only 48 hours since this happened, so I'm not sure when this video would go up, but still just waiting to see what's really going on, and it's probably going to take some time, maybe like a week or two, to really see how things fall out um, before we see what trajectory Venezuela is on. But before we get into all that, I just want to cover the lead up to this. If you haven't checked out the Venezuela imminent war with Venezuela part one and part two, please check those out. This is part three. So I will cover the lead up to the imminent. So this is like starting in December all the way up through present, post kidnapping of Maduro. So we'll start off with this tweet from Glenn Green, making fentanyl a weapon of mass destruction. Just the ridiculousness of the charade that the U.S. would go through just to demonize its enemies, right? Or just like silliness like this. So fentanyl is like a controlled drug in every operating room in every hospital, everywhere that they use for patients. But now it's a weapon of mass destruction. I mean, it's just so silly. And Glenn says here the Trump movement spent 8 years arguing that neoconservatism was an evil that had to be purged from the GOP, pointing to Iraq as its apex. Now Trump is about to start a regime change war by calling fentanyl a WMD that Venezuela doesn't have and Maduro a terrorist. So the DEA doesn't even list Venezuela as one of the main sources of fentanyl in the United States. So again, it just flies in the face of U.S. policy or U.S. statistics to make this claim. So, I mean, but when do facts get in the way of U.S. imperialism, right? So take a look at this Trump tweet. And I want to highlight some points here. So it says, until such time as they return to the United States of America all the oil, land, and other assets that they previously stole from us for the theft of our assets and many other reasons, including terrorism, drug smuggling, and human trafficking, the Venezuela regime has been designated as a foreign terrorist organization. So, man, Trump is literally mask off imperial, and I kind of love it. You know what I mean? Because it's just really going to show to me this is just the beginning of the end of the U.S. empire, in my opinion. When it has to be this brazen, this mask off, it's because it's in panic mode, right? So I'm ordering a total and complete blockade of all sanctioned oil tankers going into and out of Venezuela. So our land, our oil, in a unilateral blockade. So they move as if the Monroe Doctrine is just natural law, like gravity, right? Here's Aaron Monte announcing an escalation of his siege campaign. Trump claims Venezuela stole oil, land, and other assets from the United States. This would be a deranged statement on its own, but Trump's regime change campaign has stolen vital assets from Venezuela, including an oil company, Citgo, gold reserves in the UK banks, and presidential plane and oil tankers. Yes, so like I said, all the West does is steal, but they project its own image on everybody, on its victims. So they accuse its victims of being the thieves and the imperialists. All right, it's a common trope, and people fall for it all the time. It's one thing that the U.S. is good at, and that's propaganda. At least to their own citizens. But I think hopefully people are waking up, but not everybody, man, not everybody. And here we go here. Top Trump aide suggests boat strikes aimed to top Venezuela's Maduro. So, again, you remember the campaign going up to just bombing ordinary fishermen, just killing people. And here's Trump. Let's see what he has to say. And this is a great follow on Twitter. Power to the people. A proud socialist. Trump won Venezuela. They took all our oil and we want it back. They took it. They illegally took it. Right. So classic white supremacy trope. Everybody else's resources under the ground belongs to us, right? In our corporations. This is exactly what the U.S. did to Venezuela. The U.S. stole the oil tanker and is waging an illegal war to steal their oil. This is Hitler-esque gaslighting. Okay, so this clip won't play, unfortunately. Let's try it again. See if it. All right, so this won't play, unfortunately. That's okay. So this is Maduro. This is what he said. Just, I think, I don't know if this was a day or two. This is, no, this is actually mid-December. I don't know exactly the date, but this is just when it was uploaded. But this is what he says. He says they aim to impose a puppet government that wouldn't last 47 hours, that would hand over constitutional sovereignty and all the wealth and turn Venezuela into a colony. Simply put, this is never, ever going to happen, right? And I hope you're right, Maduro. I hope you're right. So again, the vial of fentanyl from Venezuela is a WMD. So, you know, making fun of Colin Powell and his yellow cake at the UN's council in the in the lead up to the Iraq war, when which we call it had WMDs. Iraq had WMDs. So if fentanyl is a WMD, like I said, every operating room in America, across America, and hospitals across America have to be invaded. And again, like I said, never mind that the U.S.'s own DEA report reads that Venezuela has very little to do with fentanyl coming into the United States, but we just can't let facts get in the way of stealing people's shit. Right? We just can't. So here we have U.S. pursuing third oil tanker near Venezuelan officials, right? So the question I have here, if this is about fentanyl and fentanyl being a WMD and like, you know, Trump wanting to protect Americans from fentanyl because, you know, so all drug consumption in America will decrease now that Maduro's out of power, right? I'm really interested to see what kind of charges they bring in this kangaroo court because it's really going to be a shit show. But anyway, so why are you hijacking oil tankers if this is about fentanyl, right? Again, facts can't get in the way of U.S. imperialism, right? So Adam Johnson has something great to say here. So, of course, this guy here, he's quote tweeting a stenographer, Mockingbird stenographer. But he says, more brainless stenography from the paper of record. Is anyone at the New York Times interested in doing any actual journalism or just running through a list of officials say and wholesale embarrassing the U.S. government's line? Let's break down the problems with this latest copy and paste job from the New York Times. So, of course, you can see the New York Times is trying to like just manufacture consent for, Iranian, they're involved in the oil trade. And first of all, when people talk about sanctions and sanctioned oil tankers and things like that, the United States is not the global emperor. They don't get to just say, hey, you can't trade with Venezuela because we say so. Venezuela is a sovereign nation. And so what the U.S. is saying is that this is our hemisphere, so anybody in this hemisphere has to get our approval to trade with somebody. No, they don't. Again, this is the U.S. believing it is the colonial master of the universe, right? So in the New York Times, if you write for the New York Times, you're going to have that sentiment. They hire for that, okay? Corporate media is filled with stenographers. You just have to be one in order to get to that level, okay? So, continuing on with Adam's tweet, the piece heavily implies that Venezuela's oil is under sanction from the U.S. and other countries. It is not. It is only sanctioned under the United States. 2, we've now moved from scare quotes to the New York Times just using the term ghost tankers. This is a meaningless propaganda term, and it is. So when I say like a ghost fleet or things like that, that just means that the tanker is not insured by London. So again, white supremacy putting itself at the center of the universe. If we don't insure you, then you're a ghost fleet and you're illegal. No, there are other insurance systems around the world that doesn't go through London, right? Again, and they don't tell you that. Again, remember, everything that the U.S. government or in their stenographer media tells you has to be decontextualized and ahistorical. So moving on. So why are they ghosts? Could it be because one country, the U.S., is stealing their oil and they'd like them to not do that? Is anyone at the New York Times interested in asking if these ships are hiding their location because the U.S. is hijacking them rather than the current narrative? That the U.S. Is hijacking the ships because the U.S. is suddenly very interested in the flag, this formalism in international waters. Does anyone think this is anything other than pretextual and clearly a system designed to create its own pretext through U.S. belligerence? Exactly. But you don't ask these questions in mainstream media because you're not allowed to. You're not even allowed to think this far away from, you're not allowed to even think it. You can't even think outside of that particular perspective, right? And that's why you get hired at the New York Times or the Washington or the Bezos Post, right? So again, number 3, the U.S. can steal billions in oil from a starving country, but don't worry, New York Times assures us it's only a law enforcement action, not an act of war. So if China unilaterally stole dozens of U.S. ships with billions of oil, rest assured that the New York Times would not consider this an act of war, 100%. Number 4, once again, the New York Times makes its claim these actions are legal, citing the U.S. law of the sea. And once again, the New York Times does so without pointing out the fairly relevant fact that the U.S., unlike 167 other countries, is not a signatory to the U.S. law of the sea. Again, so this is just U.S. saying that it has domination and can just do shit just because it can. This is like total anarchy. So the New York Times finds a blob lawyer to throw out fancy sounding that seem vaguely consistent with international law without noticing that 1, random countries can't just go around enforcing flag requirements via stealing ships, and 2, the U.S. isn't a signatory to the relevant treaty to begin with. And he goes on, but y'all can read more of the clip, but he just tears apart this New York Times article. And this is the type of scrutiny that you always need to hold corporate media up to, and you find that it always falls apart. So here's Ben Norton also weighing in on this. So Reuters reports the White House has ordered U.S. military forces to focus almost exclusively on enforcing a quarantine of Venezuelan oil for at least the next 2 months. So the U.S. military is the largest force of piracy on earth. Oh, and that quote was from Reuters. So this has been commentary here. So the U.S. military is the largest force of piracy on earth, 100%. Trump's plan is to continue stealing Venezuela's oil and imposing this criminal naval blockade for months to starve the Venezuelan government of export revenue, crash the currency, provoke hyperinflation, and intentionally unleash an economic crisis that causes millions of Venezuelans to suffer, all to desperately try to bring about regime change and install a U.S. puppet regime that will sell off Venezuela's oil, gas, gold, critical minerals, and other assets to U.S. corporations on the cheap. This is what it is all about. This is colonization by definition. By definition, this is what it is. Look, like a little mosquito just trying to suck up all the oil, all that country's oil. Seizing a tanker in international waters because of alleged violations of U.S. sanctions is the logical equivalent of stopping a driver in France for violating the California speed limit. 100%. I made a similar statement to that in a LinkedIn post. So UN experts condemn United States blockade and aggression against Venezuela. Let's dig a little bit more deeply into this one. So we have UN experts today denounced the partial maritime blockade imposed by the United States when Venezuela is violate fundamental rules of international law. There is no right to enforce unilateral sanctions through an armed blockade, experts said. 100%. There are serious concerns that the sanctions are unlawful. It's not a concern that it's unlawful. It is unlawful. Don't mince words here. Disproportionate and punitive under international law, and that they have seriously undermined the human rights of the Venezuelan people and the sustainable development goal, the experts say. So yeah, I mean, they have to condemn it because it's against international law. The UNIC is like an organization that's like totally like neutered, and also it's like a lot of people in the organization are bribed to carry out the U.S. bidding. Like we have evidence of this. So they get certain reports created and shit like that. They get people to. There's all types of shit that goes on, and the ICC is probably the biggest example as well. But ABC News: Trump ramping up pressure on Maduro. So look, this is them playing it up. So this was December 23rd, 2025, and look at the highlighted. This is Trump. He can do whatever he wants. It's all right. Whatever he wants to do. If he wants to do something, if he plays tough, it'll be the last time he ever able to play tough. Trump says. So like. Trump is like a narcissist living out his emperor of the world dreams, and I don't really think he cares. He just wants to get everything done before the midterms because, again, the pathetic Democrats are going to of course, they're going to get in and try to be, they're going to be as, performatively anti-Trump as, as they have been, but they are down for this whole situation. You know what I mean? They want this to happen. The only thing that they're going to say is oh, well, he didn't get congressional approval, but they don't give a damn. They wanted this outcome. They're just as imperialist. Again, it is one giant purple party, especially when it comes to foreign policy. They do not disagree. They only do that for the cameras, for Americans. They only do that for the cameras. That's why Trump is a breath of fresh air because he's totally mask off. And I appreciate that. So again, we can look at this part right here and the underlined and the highlighted. Separately, since September, the U.S. military has launched dozens of strikes on vessels in the Caribbean. They call them vessels. These are fishermen's boats. And they also stole other oil tankers. And Trump even said verbatim, we're going to keep the oil. How is this not theft? These strikes have killed more than 100 people, according to numbers provided by the administration. The strikes have several raised legal. Okay, that's a typo. Several raised legal questions from has raised several legal questions. That should probably read from lawmakers of being parties and legal experts. Though the administration has justified the use of lethal strikes as part of its so-called war on drug cartels. Okay, dude. Anywhere drugs are pouring in, anywhere, not just Venezuela, Trump said when asked if he was only referring to Venezuela land strikes. Wow, man. So at the end, they talk about drugs, but Americans import a bunch of drugs because like America are like the biggest market for these drugs. Okay, because it's a bunch of folks with low self esteem, mental health issues, and they just need a way to cope, right? The big banks launder the cartel money. So if you really wanted to stop this, you would go there. But nobody is buying that this is being done for a public health issue, especially when Trump already said, even during Trump won during his first administration, that this was the whole Juan Guaido situation was all about the oil. Right. So it's just blatant colonization. I don't know. He goes back and forth between trying to hide it and like try to stick with the cover story. But the truth comes out because Trump can't really help himself, and that is one of the reasons. That is one thing I appreciate about him. Um, One of the benefits of his administration is that you don't get a lot of fluff. I mean, you still do, but he's just a PR nightmare in that, like, he's just off the cuff, and which is good for us who want to know the truth, right? And how people really feel, or the deep state, what's really on the deep state's agenda. And Matt Kennard. So Trump says U.S. hit dock in Venezuela, marking first known land attack. So that was December 29th. It's now emerged that day before Trump became the first U.S. president ever to bomb Nigeria on Christmas Day, he became the first U.S. president ever to bomb Venezuela. He calls himself the peace president. They used to have the decency to do a false flag first. Mask off. Mask is now fully off, 100%. And I'm okay with it. Let the whole world see what the U.S. empire is all about. His Garriman, the operation in Venezuela was prepared similarly to the operation in Syria by bribing military leaders, and I believe that happened because why did? And he says this in the next line. That's why we didn't see any air defense working. Yeah, because that was totally stood. Air defense stood down. They actually let this happen. So something was worked out. Some kind of deal. Something was worked out. But like I said, it's unclear what's happening now on the ground. So we got to see how things shake out. It's way too soon. 48 hours after this happened is way too soon to make any conclusions yet. All right, so now we're going to look at some of the strikes that happened in the country. So we'll go down the line. So the first one is Saeed Mohammed. He talked about has served as the U.S. AH-1Z Viper attack helicopter strike targets in Caracas. Like, how did they fly so low? Like, and y'all couldn't take them down? Obviously, something was going on here. All right, so let's look at some of the footage. All right, so we'll look at a few more videos regarding the aftermath of what happened um, and some media reaction to everything. So I love this tweet by Sean. The fall of the American empire will be one celebrated for centuries to come. I cannot disagree more. So let's look at some of these other videos.
Every adversary of the United States operate in the Western Hezbollah has operations. The terrorist group has based in Lebanon has operations that have been widely reported to be based in Venezuela. Iran is operating in Venezuela. Russia, China. It has become sort of the satellite state for the countries who we consider our adversaries and who are bent on trying to do everything they can to destabilize and undermine the West. So,
when they say do everything to undermine and destabilize the West, that means not bend the knee and let the West control all its resources and be a slave to the U.S. dollar system. So they see that as being hostile to them. You know, so America is like, you don't want to be part of the dollar system, but that's being hostile to me, right? That's literally how they see this. That's the psychology behind it. So I think, I think a lot of times, like, I often get frustrated by, seeing how these people talk sometimes, you know what I mean? But then I got to realize, like, they really do feel like everything was promised to them 3,000 years ago. You know what I mean? Or like, this is like a typical white supremacist trope. It just is. And they just can't see it any other way. Everybody's resources belong to them. If you don't bend the knee and be part of the dollar system, then you're being hostile to me, right? You're trying to undermine me by not being a slave for me and not allowing your resources to be controlled by me. You know what I'm saying? They think they're God. They really do. So moving on.
Soberano, que viva Venezuela libre, camarada. Que viva. Esto no es con un presidente, es con un pueblo digno, camarada, que aquí está presente.
Okay, so I don't think this was one of the fake AI videos that came out that are being broadcast on all over Twitter that Elon Musk is retweeting, showing people in Venezuela like so happy that Maduro's going. It's just all propaganda. It's just they create a whole reality for you, man. They create a whole reality for you. Like, oh goodness, we need to look. We probably need to deep dive into that. I think it was Christine Amanpour who interviewed that Messiah agent. He was like, we just create realities. Oh yeah, 100%.
Nuestro suelo sagrado en las localidades de Fuerte Tiuna, Caracas, los estados Miranda, Aragua y La Guaira, llegando a impactar con sus misiles y cohetes disparados desde sus helicópteros de combate en urbanismos de población civil, para lo cual estamos ya levantando la información referente a heridos y muertos. Frente a este ataque, Ruiz
Soberano, que viva
All right, sorry about that. I had a little glitch. But that last clip was from the defense minister. And again, I need to see more before, because something's not right about this. This operation was too smooth, too easy. And, I need more info. But some more tweets coming out. So Chris Evans, how does the U.S. military have the authority to arrest another country's head of state and their spouse? 100%, right? Tiberius, every single U.S. soldier in the entire line of command, from the drone operators up to Trump, are responsible. You're attacking foreign countries for oil companies. You're not defending shit. You're what needs to be defended against. You're the evil scum of the earth. 100%. That's why I do not support the troops. I do not support the troops. I support veterans, especially when they come back and realize how they got played. But other than that, I don't support these hoorah troops who just go around murdering people for U.S. corporations. Like, that is not honorable. And just to get free college and free healthcare for the rest of your life. That's how you get taken care of. You just got to be a slave for the U.S. empire, right? Bay Area People's Republic. We need to start calling U.S. soldiers baby killers again. It should be embarrassing to be a member of the U.S. military. You serve pedophiles and oil companies, 100%. And some more. So notice here that we have Trump with IC indicted Netanyahu. I don't know why I called him Nicholas. I'm still got Maduro on the mind. But like, yeah, so if check out the ICCU to understand, how inept and nonsense the ICC is and just a tool of Western hegemony. But here's Hadi. The U.S. can kidnap a president from a sovereign country, drag him into its courts and call it justice, and then turn around and sanction the ICC for trying to arrest a war criminal committing genocide. I don't think you can truly understand how broken the world is because of the United States, 100%. And then Bronze Guevara, the hypocrisy. America hosted the war criminal Netanyahu a few days ago. Known there is a global arrest warrant out for him. Yet Trump illegally enters a sovereign nation and kidnaps an elected president. Fucking appalling. America is doomed. 100%. America is cooked. It is cooked. It's too mask all blatant imperialism, and you don't have an Obama figure to sit there and be like, well, guys, I'm the black president, so I can just sit here and sit pretty and just be the black face of the empire. You know what I mean? For media optics. No, that's over now. We got blatant white supremacy happening. And this is crazy, man. This is insane.
We're going to run the country until such time as we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transit.
We're going to run the country. So again, this is about the insolvent empire and its exorbitant privilege being on the cusp of failure, right? Because again, insolvent, right? So it needed to foreclose on the country to take control of its assets. The U.S. military is the private gun for the Department of Energy and these private corporations, and they forcing Venezuela oil back into the dollar-denominated currency. So they're basically telling Venezuela, your resources belong to the dollar system. You know what I mean? This is why the world needs to be multipolar. This is why we need an alternate currency. This is why I'm not currency, but an alternate basket of currencies. So the dollar just isn't it, because otherwise, the U.S. needs to create a demand for its dollars in order to stay afloat, because otherwise we are not we. I try to remove myself from, even though I'm based in the United States, I try to remove myself so I can remain objective. But the U.S. is cooked. The U.S. is cooked. So this is something that had to do from an empire standpoint, but I think it's going to backfire 100%. So, every country is watching. If you refuse to sell your oil in USD, the U.S. will come after you next, is what everybody is thinking, right? So this is an admission that the U.S. empire is totally bankrupt. The largest oil reserves fall into the hands of the U.S. via outright theft. But this is at the cost of trust, influence, and the legitimacy of the dollar. So I don't know. I think it's all over, man. It's all over. Nicolas Maduro presided over a brutal and repressive dictatorship that brought about unimaginable suffering on the Venezuelan people. The end of his regime offers new hope for the country. This is not the time to comment on the legality of the recent actions. This is the Prime Minister of Greece. So don't worry about legality. Don't worry about this being extrajudicial. We say that he's a repressive dictator so we can take him out because, again, white supremacy, we're the arbiters of the world and we determine who can be in charge of what country. And of course, Keir Starmer, I'm awaiting guidance from Washington before forming an opinion. The British are just so pathetic, man. Kim.com, warning, 90% of Trump's support regarding Venezuela on social media is not organic, it's bot generated. Same CIA playbook as Ukraine. Don't be fooled. The vast majority is against what Trump did in Venezuela. The fact that they need bots to fake support shows how weak Trump is now, 100%. I don't think that their internet theory is wrong, man. I mean, it gets dismissed by the establishment as a conspiracy theory, but they have every reason to dismiss it as a conspiracy theory. I mean, just look at 2015 Twitter, what the DNC was doing, right? Matt Taibbi blew the lid right off of that. It's just a bot farm, and they want to manufacture consent, make it seem like everybody has this opinion, and you're stupid for not going along with it. That is the intent. David Hundayan, one of my favorite journalists. Same story in Brazil, same story in Colombia, same story in South Africa. So he's quote tweeting Hove again. It's jarring how racially segregated Venezuelan politics are. Seems as though all the Gusanos are white Spaniards. 100%. Yeah, man. So like they're showing people in Miami who are the Gusanos. Like the first of all, what I always tell people about South America is the Spanish never left. Right. A lot of countries got independence, but it still kept that white Spanish descended minority in control of the economy, whereas the black, brown, indigenous folks were not even like they didn't even get basic services in Venezuela, like healthcare and shit like that. You know what I mean? So when Hugo Chavez, you know, created the Bolivarian Revolution and gave a lot of the country's wealth and reinvested it into the poor people, and that's why they support him. They supported him, and then Maduro after him. You know, that's antithetical to like U.S. capitalism. You know, profits from oil are supposed to be privatized, not used to make people's lives better, not used to make the citizens' lives better. You know, the U.S. does not like that. So that's why they want to take over all your resources, because they want their corporations in there. They want to privatize it, and they want to sell it for a profit. And fuck all the ordinary people and the working class people. You don't get shit. The only way you get something is if you work for us for wages. You just want to enslave the planet. It's so obvious. So continuing on with Dave's tweet, one particular group always seems to be in support of anything imperialism or Israel related. Same people every single time. The noticers will keep noticing with much noticeable noticement. So this is Delcy Rodriguez, and she had an interview with The Atlantic. Oh no, well, Trump's interview in The Atlantic. Sorry, he threatened her in The Atlantic. But there's some things going on with her. She said, you know, Venezuela would never become a colony. She called Maduro's kid barbaric and illegal. But I'm not sure what's going on with her. So she assumed the president, apparently, but you know, I just need to still, you know, it says here the VP of Venezuela, Delcy Rodriguez, who is now acting leader, given U.S. kidnapping of President Nicolas Maduro, is being threatened by Trump and men for not ceding Venezuela's natural resources and instead demanding release of Venezuela's kidnapped president. So, like I said, a lot of fog of war. I'm not sure who to trust in the Venezuela government right now. I think it's very obvious that somebody betrayed the Bolivarian Revolution here. So like I said, I'm just waiting a week or two just to see how things shake out before I come to any conclusions. But one conclusion is for sure. This was an illegal extrajudicial kidnapping, and the U.S. is not the arbiter of who's a dictator or not, and not the policeman of the world. George Galloway, the parading of Maduro in a cage through the streets of New York last night by Donald Trump will become an iconic event in the narrative of imperialist savagery. Like the murder of Lumumba and Allende, men of the South in chains is a very American story. 100%. 100%. This is like Rome, Coliseum games. You know, that's the vibe I got with that. I have a clip of that later on. Tamanisha John, too many people have been quick to share the lies of the U.S. with the full recognition and acknowledgement that the Trump administration and much of the U.S. media is not truthful. Do better, 100%. Do not share anything from mainstream media without any verification or without any commentary, because you know it's propaganda, it's manufacturing consent, it's Operation Mockingbird. Okay, always be mindful. Sony thing, great follow. Look at the pattern. The U.S. never discovers human rights in a poor country that has nothing to steal. It discovers human rights where there is oil, rare earths, strategic ports, and disobedience. It discovers human rights when a government will not kneel. It forgets human rights when its allies butcher and starve in broad daylight. This is not morality. This is branding. 100%. Caitlin Johnstone, Democrats spent more than a decade saying Trump is an evil fascist, and then when he invades a sovereign nation and abducts its leader, all they've got to say is, oh gosh, I wish he'd been more polite about it. He should have asked Congress first. They're just Trump with a rainbow flag. 100%. 100%. Like I said, it's one big purple party, and they're going to put up full resistance to this, just, you know, because they got to play the role of the blue party versus the red party. But behind closed doors, one big purple party that all champion U.S. imperialism. Okay. Corinne, only the U.S. could invade a sovereign nation, abduct the sitting president, and then announce it on X like it just won a humanitarian award. Empire has never looked so casual. It has not. And I love this meme of Trump. If I don't steal Venezuelan oil, someone else will.
So what do you make of the latest development, U.S. military attacks against Venezuela?
Well, this is another very...
So real quick, just going to introduce this segment. This is Jeffrey Sachs, and he's just going to say, offer some commentary. So we have a couple more clips of just some commentary. So just sit tight. And this is, Dr. Jeffrey Sachs.
Dire violation of international law. It's more U.S.-led violence. The United States is a war machine. It is at war with Israel against the Palestinian people. It has been at war in Syria. It is at war in Yemen. The United States bombed Nigeria last week. The United States threatened that it will attack Iran. And now it has attacked Venezuela. So this is part of a U.S. Military regime that we have been living in for a long time. The overthrow of the president of Venezuela, the kidnapping of the president, is a long-standing initiative of the United States. This goes back more than 20 years because the United States tried to take out the predecessor of Maduro, Hugo Chavez, in a attempted coup in 2002. That coup failed, but the United States was deeply complicit in that. Since that time, the United States has been trying to overthrow the government of Maduro. Well, it hasn't.
Okay, so that was Jeffrey Sachs. We'll end that there. So remember this tweet by George Galloway about parading Maduro around in a cage. Well, here's the video of that. I mean, this is just so shameful, man. This is just so shameful. So Mohammed Marandi, his commentary is right on. The U.S. military paraded their hostage, President Nicolas Maduro, through the streets of New York. The U.S. has become a rapidly declining empire led by clowns, 100%. I mean, this is so shameful. This is so shameful. It's like a circus, man. It's a circus.
The people standing behind me, referring to the Secretary of... People standing behind...
Sorry. So this is Ben Norton, geopolitical economic report with some quick commentary. Just wanted to hear what he had to say. So check this out.
And me, referring to the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, and the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth. And then he also said that the U.S. government is going to appoint people as representatives. So this has nothing to do with democracy. Again, the U.S. government does not want the people of Venezuela to actually have their sovereignty. The U.S. is treating this independent country as a colony. Listen here.
Would run Venezuela.
Well, it's largely going to be for a period of time. The people that are standing right behind me, we're going to be running it. We're going to be bringing it back. It's a dead. I talk about a dead country.
Is that what you're going to run the country? Are you going to designate it?
Yes. It's all being done right now. We're designating people. We're talking to people. We're designating various people, and we're going to let you know who those people are. We're going to be running it with a group, and we're going to make sure it's run properly. We're going to rebuild the oil infrastructure.
And then after that, in one of the craziest moments of the press conference, a journalist asked Trump if the U.S. government will be running Venezuela for several years. And Trump basically said yes. He didn't directly answer the question, but he implied that yes, the goal is for the U.S. government to run Venezuela as a colony for years until there's a transition to a pro-U.S. leadership. And in the meantime, Trump defended this colonial occupation by saying, don't worry, we're going to pay for it by exploiting Venezuela's oil. He boasted that U.S. corporations are going to invest in modernizing Venezuela's infrastructure, and they're going to use that oil in order to fund the colonial U.S. occupation of the country. It's absolutely crazy. Listen here.
Is up administrating Venezuela?
Well, it won't cost us anything because the money coming out of the ground is very substantial. So it's not going to cost us anything. We want safety there. We want to be surrounded by countries that aren't housing all of our enemies all over the world. That's what was happening. And you don't want to have that. But we're going to be rebuilding, and we're not spending money. The oil companies are going to go in. They're going to spend money. We're going to take back the oil that, frankly, we should have taken back a long time ago. A lot of money is coming out of the ground. We're going to get reimbursed for all of that. We're going to get reimbursed for everything that we spend. So it's going to be a very important. This is a very big evening that took place last night. We have to be surrounded by safe, secure countries. And we also have to have energy. Very important. We have to have energy.
In addition to that, another reporter asked Trump if he plans on deploying U.S. troops inside Venezuela in order to oversee this colonial occupation. And once again, Trump basically said yes. He said, yeah, we're not afraid of deploying U.S. troops in Venezuela. He boasted that they already had troops on the ground in Venezuela.
Does the U.S. running the country mean that U.S. troops will be on the ground? How will that work?
Well, you know, they always say boots on the ground. Oh, so we're not afraid of boots on the ground if we have to have. We had boots on the ground last night at a very high level, actually. We're not afraid of it. We don't mind saying it. But we're going to make sure that that country is run properly. We're not doing this in vain.
In a follow-up question, a reporter then asked Trump for more details about the plans for U.S. troops on the ground. And Trump said, well, we're going to send oil technicians from big corporations to go to Venezuela in order to exploit its oil and make lots of money.
You referenced boots on the ground earlier. Can you just sort of button this up? Do you envision the U.S. military having a presence in Venezuela as the U.S. runs that?
Well, no, we're going to have a presence in Venezuela as it pertains to oil because we have to have, we're sending our expertise in. So you may need something, not very much. But no, we're going to be taking out a tremendous amount of wealth out of the ground. And that wealth is going to the people of Venezuela and people from outside of Venezuela that used to be in Venezuela. And it goes also to the United States of America in the form of reimbursement for the damages caused us by that country.
This was a point that Trump constantly emphasized throughout the press conference. At the beginning, he spent like a few minutes pretending that this was about drugs, but then later he showed that was a lie. This has nothing to do with drugs. This is about pillaging Venezuela. And by the way, it's not just oil that the U.S. wants to pillage in Venezuela. The country also has significant reserves of natural gas and gold and critical minerals and rare earth elements. And the Trump administration has been very open about the fact that it plans on sending U.S. corporations to exploit all of these natural resources. In fact,
So that was Ben Norton. Fantastic channel to follow, Geopolitical Economic Report. He brings the receipts, and which I appreciate. So make sure you follow him. Next, we're going to have the first post report. It's always good to see what people internationally have to say about these things. And I think we're going to get a lot of people condemning the worldwide. So I think this was a really bold, brazen, and self-defeating move by the Trump administration. But yeah, let's see what first post is saying.
Something like this rarely happens. We've gotten used to seeing conflicts and flashpoints. But to kidnap a sitting president, that's as reckless and brazen as it gets. So the international community must be furious, right? Well, some of them, yes. Maduro did have some allies in the anti-US camp, like Iran, China, and Russia, and they have strongly condemned the attack. Here's what Russia said. This is deeply concerning and condemnable. The pretexts used to justify such actions are untenable. Ideological hostility has triumphed over business-like pragmatism. Moscow is calling this an act of armed aggression. After all, what sort of bully attacks a smaller neighbor? China, too, has condemned the United States. They're calling it a hegemonic attack that violates sovereignty. In fact, yesterday, China's special envoy had met Maduro in Caracas. He was the last foreign dignitary to meet Nicolas Maduro. Iran has also condemned the attack. They're calling it a flagrant violation of Venezuela's sovereignty. Now we come to American allies, especially those in Europe. How are the champions of a rules-based order reacting to this? With their trademark hypocrisy. Look at the reaction from the European Union. The EU has repeatedly stated that Mr. Maduro lacks legitimacy and opposed a peaceful transition. Under all circumstances, the principles of international law and the UN Charter must be respected. We call for restraint. You call for restraint? A sitting president was captured in the middle of the night. I think we are long past restraint. Imagine if Russia had done this to Ukraine's President Zelensky, attacked bases at night, swooped in with the helicopters, arrested Zelensky and his wife, and flown them back to Russia. How would the European Union have responded? Would they have still called for restraint? Or would they have condemned it? This is the double standard I was talking about. Trump's other ally, the United Kingdom, is distancing itself from the attack. The UK has overseas territories in the Caribbean, where Prime Minister Keir Starmer has categorically denied any role.
Well, I want to establish the facts first. I want to speak to President Trump. I want to speak to allies. As I say, I can be absolutely clear that we were not involved in that. And as you know, I always say and believe we should all uphold international law. But I think at this stage, fast-moving situation, let's establish the facts and take it from there.
Such a vague statement to make. All should uphold international law. It may make for a good speech at an MUN, a Model United Nations. But this is the real world, so be specific. Who violated international law? Who kidnapped the president? And who carried out unilateral airstrikes? It certainly wasn't Venezuela. The fact is, this is complete moral bankruptcy. With what face will the West now ask China to stay away from Taiwan or Russia to end the war in Ukraine? Forget a moral high ground, they don't have any ground left to stand on. Even within the region, the sentiment is divided. Some Latin American leaders have welcomed Trump's intervention, like Argentina's President Javier Milei. He's calling it of liberation. But most others have condemned it. Mexico is calling it a violation of the United Nations Charter. Brazil says it's the first step towards violence and lawlessness. Chile has opposed any foreign interference, and Cuba is calling it a criminal attack. Just to be...
So that was first post. This cut off here. I was kind of disappointed in this clip because after this point, when it cuts off, she goes in and she actually repeats a lot of the Western nonsense about Maduro, but then she doubles down and saying, but, you know, kidnapping him is illegal. But I don't know. I listened to what Jimmy Carter had to say as an election observer in Venezuela, and he had great things to say about their system. And a lot of people actually have a lot of great things to say about their system, like international observers, not just people who are aligned with the West, who are going to demonize anything that anyone outside of the West does. You know what I'm saying? Like objective folks. So I don't, and I feel like he was, and I know he was democratically elected based on like that testimony. So I just don't get it. I just don't get why, you know, there's all this, you know, Maduro's a dictator. You know, I just, you know, I was really surprised to hear that coming from her on first post. But anyways, this next clip is going to be from Li Jingjing. And she does not mince words here. And so let's listen to what she has to say.
The United States is the world's #1 terrorist. It has no money for its own citizens' health care, but it has unlimited funds for bombing other sovereign countries. The latest illegal aggression against Venezuela is another in a series of surging strikes under Trump's second term. Throughout 2025, the Trump administration bombed Somalia, Iraq, Yemen, Iran, the Caribbean Sea, and Eastern Pacific Ocean, Syria, and Nigeria. This crazy administration of a dying, belligerent empire is pulling the entire world into destruction. Why? Because they're desperately trying to maintain their global dominance. The attacks on Venezuela and its leader Maduro have nothing to do with dealing with drugs. In fact, the U.S. works with some of the most notorious drug dealers in Latin America. It's about stealing the large oil reserves, the gold, rare earth, and all the minerals in Venezuela. It's about threatening all the Latin American countries that refuse to be obedient to the U.S., threatening those who want to control their own natural resources, their own government policies. It's about cutting Latin American countries' ties with China, which is the partner to many countries in the region. Ignoring international laws, kidnapping another country's leader, stealing and plundering other countries' resources. This is pure colonialism and naked imperialism.
So the audio wasn't synced up well with that one, but she made a great point. And I like her commentary here. The United States is the world's #1 terrorist country. It is. The U.S. is a terrorist state. We just got to say what it's, call it out like it is. It does not care about the rest of the world, nor do they care about their own citizens. And we can see that in the health outcomes. They don't give a damn about us. We're just slaves for these people. Trust me. All they see us as is like sources for free labor in their prisons and like people who pay taxes. And they're always trying to find a way to get more out of us. So yeah. So guys, again, we're going to pay attention to this. See what's going on in terms of the fog of war, see how things shake out. But it's no doubt about it. Losing Venezuela is a blow to the multipolar movement. If it turns out that way, I do think that there's a lot of folks within the country who will fight and defend the Bolivarian Revolution, but we just need to see how things shake out, because I really do believe that somebody in the military betrayed the revolution, and until those folks are purged, the country will always be in limbo, because you'll always have somebody who's on the ops payroll, right? And I like to say that, you know, the United States, its superpower is not just propaganda, but it's probably really its main superpower is bribery. You know, with $1 trillion military budget and the Pentagon not being able to pass an audit, I think a lot of that has to do with, like, you know, lining pockets so that people would just turn the other cheek, or turn and looking up the other way, or just serve the empire by, you know, just being on his payroll. So that's how it works. Take it from me, somebody who's been COINTELPRO in the workplace. So anyways, thanks guys. Hope you enjoyed the video. Like, share, subscribe. There'll be more coverage on Venezuela as we see how this shakes out. But until then, peace.